Hello and welcome to the daily newspaper analysis. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 8th of February 2018. So coming to the first article, in inflation's shadow. Now the context here is that the RBI has recently through its monetary policy committee has kept the repo rate unchanged at 6%. Now before we start the discussion, you need to have some understanding about the monetary policy committee. The monetary policy committee is a committee which was formed in the year 2016 after the recommendations of the Urjit Patel committee. This was largely formed to resolve the tussle between the government and the RBI over challenges in setting the monetary policy rate at the time of high inflation rate versus a low growth rate in the economy. So it was in this perspective that the MPC was formed. It comprises of 6 members. Of these 6 members, 3 members of the RBI and 3 members are of the government. The ex officio chairman is the RBI governor, and in case of a tie between these members, it is the casting vote of the RBI governor that matters. So that is something that is important. Another thing that you need to know is that the MPC is mandated to keep the inflation rate within a range of 2% to 6%. So that is something that is important. If for 3 consecutive months this limit is something that is breached, then in that case the MPC becomes answerable to the government of India. So that is something that you needed to know about the Monetary Policy Committee. Now coming to the repo rate. In brief, the repo rate is the rate at which the central bank of the country lends money to the commercial banks. So this rate will determine that how much is the liquidity with the commercial banks. If this rate is low, then it will be advantageous for the commercial banks to take money from the RBI, and this money they can further put in the economy through credits. So this is a means by which the RBI is controlling the credit rate in the economy. So that is what repo rate is. Now coming to the issues which are important here. The first issue is with regards to the consumer price index inflation. Now you need to know that whenever the RBI is going to consider inflation, it is also always going to take consumer price index. Previously it was the wholesale price index, but since 2014 this has been changed to consumer price index, that to combined consumer price index. So first thing, this is important from prelims point of view. Now in the CPI inflation, what is important is that the inflation in the country has been rising, and this has been rising continuously for 6 straight months. For example, the food price inflation is rising. There is a rising oil and diesel prices in the country. Also, the state governments have raised their house rent allowances, and this is going to have an impact on raising the inflation. So that is something that has been analyzed. Also, there is a pickup in the global growth. There is rising oil prices. All of these issues are what have led to an increased inflation in the economy, and as a result of which the Monetary Policy Committee has taken a decision to keep the repo rate unchanged at 6%. Now here an analysis is what is vital. You need to understand that the investment in the country is at its lowest. So it is very much vital that the banks are revived and credits are increased so that people can take this credit from the bank and they can invest it in the economy. But if the repo rate is going to be unchanged, if the repo rate is going to be 6%, then this is going to be a disincentive for the banks to take the money from the RBI, as a result of which the interest rates of the banks will be high and credit taking will be something that is disincentivized. So this is a pressing concern because the government wants that this rate should be decreased, and it should be ensured that more credits are given in the economy and a push should be given to the economy. But the Monetary Policy Committee has not done that. So this is what is the analysis here. Another thing which is important is with regards to the budget of 2018. Now in the budget, the government has increased the minimum support price to the farmers. Also the government has increased the custom duties. Also, the budget has brought to the fore the fiscal slippages by the government because of the widening fiscal deficit and the shifting of fiscal deficit targets. So in this respect, you need to know that with rising MSP and rising custom duties, inflation is bound to rise. Also, fiscal slippage is again going to mean that the banks will be reluctant in lowering the credit rates, as a result of which, again, it is not vital for monetary policy to take the repo rates lower than 6%. So that is the analysis which is important. Another thing which is important in this editorial is with regards to the global trends. Now, here you need to understand that there is a normalization of monetary policy globally. This means that the easy money policy of all the governments is something that is now going to be reversed. The quantitative easing is going to be reversed, as a result of which this is going to trigger the flight of capital from emerging markets, and this is also going to impact India. So in this respect, again, the RBI has been reluctant in changing the repo rate. So that is something that has been analyzed in this particular editorial. Now, time and again, I have mentioned that in economics articles, it is not the figures which are very important. You might not be asked that what is the repo rate in the country, because this is very subjective and this is bound to change. But the concept should be clear. Why the repo rate has not been changed is something that you should have a clear understanding about. So this is what is important in this editorial. Now, coming to the next article, Khap menace. Now, the context here is that the Supreme Court has recently made some observations. And these observations have been made with regards to a writ petition which was seeking to ban community organizations like the Khap Panchayats, and this was done in order to curb honor killing. So with respect to those this writ petition, the Supreme Court has observed that no such organization, for example, no such organization like the Khap Panchayat should be allowed to act as the conscience keeper of the society, and no one should be allowed to interfere in relationship between adults. So this is something that the Supreme Court has observed, and this is indeed a stark observation. It is important in restoring the rights of the citizens. So that is where the importance is. Another thing that is relevant in the context here is the recent murder of a person named Ankit Saxena. He was a 23-year-old young boy from Delhi, and he was a photographer by profession. He was in love with a Muslim girl, and it is alleged that the girl's family members have murdered Mr. Ankit Saxena. So this is something that is vital in the context again. Now, coming to the issues which are relevant in this editorial, the first issue is with regards to the repetitive nature of such events. Time and again, the country is facing the issue of honor killing, and such cases of murders by family members is something that is continuously coming. So this is a reflection that a stark change in the society is something that is not being achieved. And even the Supreme Court has reiterated that it is compelled to time and again interfere in basic freedoms of every individual. Marriage is a personal affair, and as a result of which every individual should have some freedom in that regard, and it should not be the court's duty to each time interfere in it. So that is what the court has also observed, that it is sad that in this country, even after 70 years of rights, the court has to time and again interfere. So that is a painful event, and it is a reflection of the medieval mindset of the society. So this is something that you need to understand, that the society is not changing. So that is something that is analyzed here. Another thing is with regards to individual choices. Now, here the court have time and again mentioned that the Khap Panchayats or the society should have no business to interfere in the life choices of individuals, especially in life choices related to marriage and love. So this is something that is important, that individual choices are supreme. This can be even referred to ethics also, that individual where social values versus personal morals is something of question, then you should know that it is always the personal choices which are superseding social values. So that is something that is important. Another thing is that the Supreme Court has called these Khap Panchayats as kangaroo courts, and this is something that is unethical in a democracy. It is an unhealthy precedence that any organization, a community organization, is acting as a court in this country. This we had even discussed previously in the Padmavat row, where some self-appointed communities were acting as the censor board. So that is something that is important, that such trends of kangaroo courts is something that is unacceptable in a democracy. So this is something that is vital. Another thing which is important is with regards to the feudal prejudices. Now, this kind of rulings that one should marry within one's culture, one should not marry within the same gotra, all of these are reflections of the feudal prejudices in the country, because there was a trend in the past. There was a caste-based discrimination in this country. So all of these practices are fueling that. Also, there is an element of patriarchy which is involved, because a number of times the honor killings are more focused on the females. That is something that has been analyzed in this particular editorial, and this is something that is important. Another thing is with regards to an analysis between the rural and the urban areas. Now, it is largely believed, it was previously believed, and it is largely, even in the media, it is so reflected that the problem of honor killing is something that is more concentrated in the rural areas. But here the editorial discusses that the situation is equally prevalent in the rural as well as the urban area. So what does this reflect? This reflects is that the problem of the social mindset is something that has not changed even amongst the educated and presumably socially advanced section. So indeed, this is a pressing concern. Indeed, this is a major challenge for the country as of now. Now here's some analysis of what is vital. You need to understand that in India, when Western education came in the past, after the advent of the Britishers in India, there was a Renaissance movement, and under this movement, a lot of social evils like sati and widow remarriage was something that was challenged. So a question is going to be raised here, that when today the education levels are rising, then why is not such kind of a renaissance coming today? So that is something that one needs to ponder upon, and the role of civil society here is again important. So that is something that is vital here. Another thing is with regards to the social attitudes. Now this is something that is the key. As I've discussed, that it is not education which is bringing about a change. It is not that somebody is somehow amongst the middle class or is in the advanced section of the society. What is vital is that the social attitudes of the people have to be changed. They largely link marriages to religious aspects. For example, in the Hindu religion, it is not allowed to marry within the same gotra. So these kind of things are what require a change, and in this respect, a social attitudinal change is what is warranted. And this is the key idea which makes this entire episode or this entire editorial vital for your ethics paper. This will be a very key important a key example for the ethics paper. So that is the relevance here. Another thing which is important is that the Law Commission of India had given a draft bill in the year 2012, and this draft bill was to prohibit interference in marriage alliances. So this draft bill is what is being advocated, is that it should be implemented again. So this is something that is vital here. And as per this draft bill, it has been advocated that the groups, these kind of groups like the Khap Panchayat or community groups, should be declared as an unlawful assembly, and they should be subject to stringent punishment. So that is something that is important. Another thing is that the opinion that this editorial has is a twin opinion, that for bringing about a change, there are two steps which is required. One is that the social attitudes should be changed. There should be a social transformation, and another thing should be a legislative change. So as we have discussed, that this draft bill should be re-brought in the parliament. So this is what is the opinion, and indeed this is a vital opinion which you can use in your answers too. So that is the importance of this editorial. Coming to the next article, a call to democracy. Now these are basically two articles here which we shall be discussing, because the context of both these articles is the same. The context is that of the constitutional crisis in Maldives. Now, time and again I have said that the politics in Maldives is something that is not going to be relevant for us. But what is relevant is that Maldives, the former president in Maldives, that is Mohammed Nasheed, has called upon India to intervene in Maldives in order to protect democracy in Maldives. So this is where the article has assumed immense importance for India. Now coming to some background, first and foremost, you need to know that there was something called an Operation Cactus. This was a code name for India's military intervention in Maldives in the year 1988, following an attempt of coup against the then government of President Mamoon Abdul Gayoom. So in 1988, in the past, India has interfered in the politics of Maldives. So a question is being raised as to should India intervene or India should not intervene. So the policies of India in the past and in the present is something that has been analyzed in this particular editorial, and that is what is relevant for us. First and foremost is that India's uniqueness is something that has been analyzed. Now you need to know that in the entire South Asia, India is a country. India is a rare country which is a democracy, because largely most of the countries are either having non-plural governments or are having mixed regimes. So India is not only a democracy, it is a democracy since its formation as a free independent nation from 1947. So that is something that is vital, which has made India unique in this region. That is what has been analyzed. Another analysis is with regards to the end of history. Now what do you understand by the end of history? In the year 1989, we should all know that the Cold War was ended, and as a result of which, End of History was an essay which was written by Francis Fukuyama, and this is a very important essay. What the basic idea of this essay was that because the Cold War has ended, now there is going to be no major development in the world, and so it is going to result in a end of history, because in the post-Cold War era, there will be a consensus around liberal democracy and capitalism. So this is something that was analyzed in this particular essay. Now this idea, the author in the editorial says that this idea is also relevant for India, because Even in India, India also has accepted a liberal democracy, and India has also accepted capitalism, and also India's international identity and emerging role has now been set as a result of this change in the 1989 policy. So this is something that has been analyzed, that the importance of this particular uh, concept given by Francis Fukuyama is also much valid for India. So that is something that is analyzed here. Another thing you need to understand with respect to this editorial is that in the past India has been championing the cause of democracies. However, it is only recently that India has made this shift in its stance of championing the cause of democracy, where India has adopted a restraint, though India advocates democracy, but it does not wish to export this democracy. So this is something that is vital. So in the era where India was championing the cause of democracy, this is what was formed. The Community of Democracies was formed in the year 2000. At this point of time, India had decided that it should be the goal of India. The Community of Democracies actually consisted of 100 countries, and all of these countries set a goal for themselves where they said that the goal would be to advance democracy in all the countries of the world. So that is something that is vital. Another thing is that a UN Democracy Fund was what was formed in the year 2005. This fund was formed between India and US, and both India and US committed to strengthening the ideals of democracy across the globe. And at that point of time, you need to know that this was also in line with the warming up of India-US relations. They also signed the Indo-US nuclear deal in the year 2005. So it was in this respect that these deals were signed. Now here you need to develop some understanding. Now democracy is definitely a wonderful idea, and indeed it has a lot of benefits. But democracy cannot, a fits all policy is something that is not even valid for democracy. For example, in China, there is not a vibrant democracy in China, but China has shown tremendous development. So definitely Chinese model is also one model which needs to be looked into and which needs to be advocated, or for the goods of this model need to be extracted. So if the entire policy or the entire bent of the argument is going to be in the favor of only democracy, then what happens is that the qualities of some other models is something that is ignored. So that is some analysis which is vital, that democracy is definitely a good ideal, but it cannot be painted across the globe. So that is something that is vital. Another thing is with regards to the democratic ideal. Here the editorial has analyzed that the democratic ideal is a common heritage of the mankind, and its benefits is something that the countries which are enjoying democracy should forward to those countries who are not enjoying democracy. So the editorial makes a case that in the past there was a belief that these values should be propagated globally. So this is something that has now been refuted, and many countries are now taking steps back from this. You should know that even the US has waged many wars. For example, even the US attack on Afghanistan was the aim of ensuring democracy in Afghanistan, but this has not resulted in this vision of US, and rather this has resulted in the longest war in history. Since 16 years, there is no result in the Afghanistan war. So that is something that is analyzed here. Another thing is with regards to the change in stand taken by India. Later, India has taken a stand in its policies, for example, from these 2000 and 2005. Later in India, from 2008 onwards, India took a changed stance where India said that indeed India is a democracy and it would welcome flourishing of other democracies. However, this concept of democracy is not something that is ideological to India, and so India does not want to polarize on this concept. So this is the newer policy which India has advocated. Now coming to some historical analysis in this regard, this analysis is also vital for the post-independence history point of view in UPSC. So that is the importance. Now, first and foremost, you need to understand that in the historical analysis, it is divided into three aspects. One is the Nehruvian era. In the Nehruvian era, India had a light footprint into the sovereign realms of other countries, and India usually believed in minimum pressure and coercion. Rather, it associated with other countries. So that is something that was a stark element of Nehru's policy. However, after Prime Minister Nehru's death, and especially in the Indira Gandhi era, that is the post-Nehruvian era, there India was India had a stark change in its policy, as there were fewer inhibitions, and rather India promoted regime transformations in some countries. For example, in the 1971 war in Bangladesh, India played a very, very important role. Also, in the Tamil issue in Sri Lanka, India was again a major participant and was critical in several episodes with regard to Sri Lanka. So in all of this, India played an active role. So that is something that has been analyzed. However, also you can mention here the Operation Cactus of 1988. So you can see that in the past, in the post-Nehruvian area, India was much, much more active in the internal affairs of other neighboring countries. So that is something that is vital. However, it was in the post-Cold War era that India has changed its stance after 1989, when Russia, the USSR disintegrated. After that, India has had a more pragmatic and a non-interfering policy, except one exception is there to this is Nepal. India has somehow interfered in Nepal's politics, but otherwise India has maintained a neutral stand. And also in the year 1997, the Gujral Doctrine was something that was given by the Prime Minister I.D. Gujral. And as per this doctrine, it was decided that India will not use any force and coercion in dealing with its neighbor. Rather, India will have a benevolent attitude towards its neighbors, and rather, India would help benefit its neighbors without any without any reciprocation by its neighbors. So that was the policy of Gujral Doctrine, and this is still today valid for India. Another thing which is important is with regard to the neighborhood policy. Now, as we have discussed that for a long time now, India has not been directly interfering with its neighbor, with the internal affairs of its neighbors. However, something that is vital now with regards to the neighborhood policy is the China factor. China has made inroads in almost all the neighbors of India. And in this respect, what is important now is that should India change its neighborhood policy, and especially in Maldives, China is a major player. So if India is going to take up a direct interfering stand in Maldives, India will be challenging China also. So definitely this is a very, very difficult geopolitical situation which has emerged in China, in Maldives, and indeed it will test the neighborhood policy of India. So that is something that is vital. This question of Maldives and the entire Maldives crisis is going to be vital for India because the government has directly called for India's participation. So that is the importance of the editorial. Coming to the next article, biologics, patients and drug prices. Now this is an important article. The context here is with regards to secondary patents, or that for that matter the evergreening of patents. Now before we discuss, some background is what is vital. First and foremost, you need to understand that patents are sought to ensure an exclusivity in usage. Now whenever a new drug is going to be invented, indeed a lot of cost goes into the research and analysis, and to incentivize this research, it is vital that a patent is given. So the patent inherently is not something that is bad. Indeed, it is a progressive step and it should be given. Now however, what happens is that this patent is usually given for an active pharmaceutical ingredient. Especially we are discussing patents related to drugs in this particular editorial. So for drugs, a patent is given for an active pharmaceutical ingredient, and generally this exclusivity period for the patent is given for 20 years, so that for this period the cost that has been spent on research and development along with profits can be ensured, can be reversed back to the company. So that is something that is important that you need to understand. Now what happens is, after 20 years, there is something called the patent cliff, because it is believed that after 20-year period, the price of the drug is going to suddenly drop because of its generic variants, and this is going to make the drug more competitive, and it is going to make the drug much more available to the poor. So that is something that is important. Now, coming to the issues which have been discussed. First issue is with regards to blockbuster medicines. Now, here you need to understand something about the blockbuster medicines. They are blockbuster from two perspectives. One, they are blockbuster because they bring in a lot of annual revenues to the company. For example, it has been given in this editorial that many drugs bring a revenue of greater than $1 billion in an year. So this is something that is important for these drug companies. Another thing why they are blockbuster is for the impacts that they have. For example, they are going to be a breakthrough drug in a particular disease. For example, if we have a drug now to completely cure cancer, then that would be a blockbuster medicine. So that is something that has been analyzed here. Another thing is with regards to the policy that the US is following with regards to patents. Now you need to know that US has a very, very liberal policy with regards to patents, and it gives secondary patents or evergreening of patents in US is easily available. This, the US says, is in line with its policy of encouraging innovation. So that is something that is the stand of US, and it is on this issue of patents that India US have major irritants. US had even decided to in previous years, in 2017 US was looking into giving India putting India into the watch list of those countries which have poor patent records. So that is one of the irritants in the India-US policy. This is something that you need to know. Another thing which is vital is with regards to the case of Gleevec drug by Novartis. Now you need to know about this drug. This was a cancer drug, and in the year 2013. The Supreme Court of India had given a judgment, it had given a landmark judgment where it denied patent to Novartis. To the company Novartis for the Gleevec drug. Now, the importance of this issue you need to understand is that it brought down the cost of this drug from rupees 1.6 lakh in a month to rupees 11,000 in a month. So definitely this was a huge impact. It has a huge welfareist approach to it. So that is something that is vital. Another one key important thing here is that the judgment by the Supreme Court was in line with the World Trade Organization regulations, and in no way is the Indian patent law against the World Trade Organization. So this is something that you need to know. Another thing is with regards to the Indian patent law. Now the Indian patent laws are one of the most strict in the world, and compared to US it is very, very strict. Now what happens is that a drug, whenever it applies for a patent, it is sent to the Indian Patents Office, which gives a judgment, and if this judgment is unacceptable, then this goes to the courts. So at present the Indian Patent Office is the major body, and it rejects most of the patent appeals by the applications. So that is something that is important. Now you need to know something about the elements of the Indian patent law. Now as per the Indian patent law, in India appreciates a major innovation or a technical advancement rather than minor tweakings here and there or trivial variants of a drug. So that is something that is important. Another thing is that for a drug to get a patent claim, it should demonstrate an improved therapeutic efficacy. If this improved therapeutic efficacy is something that cannot be demonstrated, then a secondary patent is something that the Indian law will not give. Also, India bars patents for new uses and new properties of already known substances. So this is something that is again making the Indian patent law very strict. Also, patents for combinations is allowed only if there is a synergistic effect. So if 2-3 drugs are matched and there is no synergistic effect and a patent is sought, then a patent will not be given in this respect. So that is something that is vital. Also, there is no exclusivity over methods of treatment in India's patents law. So all of these aspects of the Indian patent law is making Indian patent law somehow strict in giving patents. So that is something that has been analyzed. Now you need to understand that there is an ethical aspect associated to this. Indeed, it is vital that the recovery of costs that have been invested is something that is done. But this is not a patent with regard to any other aspect, but it is a patent with regards to medicines. And medicines are vital for the lives of the people. It cannot be said that just because to compensate for patent cost, the lives of the poor people should be impacted. For example, if a drug is a life-saving drug, then on that drug, every citizen, every person in the world should have a right. Now that is something that is vital. Here you need to make a distinction between law and ethics. This is something that is a part of your ethics paper. Even if something is legal, for example, it might be legal that the patent is provided for a period of 20 years, and so you cannot duplicate the drug. A generic version of the drug cannot be produced for 20 years. But is this ethical? This will not be ethical even if it is legal. So that is one example of difference between ethics and legality. So that is something that is vital in this example, and I would suggest that this example should be used in your ethics paper. This is a very, very important example. So that is something that is vital. Another thing is that the opinion which this editorial has given, the opinion here is that blockbuster medicines are crucial to the success of public health. However, they have been gamed and rendered inaccessible to the poor. Therefore, an effective patent law is indeed warranted, and even more warranted in a country like India, where a majority of the population is poor and does not have the ability to afford these expensive drugs. So that is something that is vital in this editorial. This topic of patents, especially with regards to medicines and drugs, is immensely vital. So that is the relevance of the editorial. Coming to the next article, the formal-informal divide. Now the context here is with regards to the slowdown in investments in the economy. Now this has been highlighted recently by the Economic Survey of 2018, and it is said that this slowdown in investment is delaying the economic recovery. Also, it is offsetting government's macroeconomic stimulus of increased public investment. So definitely this has been flagged as a major concern for the economy by the economic survey. So it is in this context that this editorial has been written. Now, some issues which are important here are, first and foremost, is that this slowdown is the worst ever. Here, the economic survey has made a case that in the history of India's economy, the slowdown in investment is the worst, and the investment had reached its peak 11 years back. So this is something that needs to be reversed, and this peak needs to be again achieved. So that is something that has been analyzed in the economic survey. Another thing is that an urgency for revival is something that is warranted, that if the economy has to get back to its path of development, then definitely an urgency in investments is something that is vital. So that is something that has been analyzed. Another thing is with regards to an informal sector versus corporate sector. Now here the economic survey has brought to an analysis, and especially the editorial has largely focused that the investment slowdown was much more visible in the informal sector of the economy rather than the corporate sector of the economy. And so focus should be on reviving this informal sector rather than the corporate sector. What has happened is that the government is focusing on the bigger corporates and ignoring the informal sector, whereas the true cause of slowdown is the informal sector. So that is something that has been brought about in this particular editorial. Another thing is with regards to the household sector. An analysis has been made of the household sector. Now here you need to understand what is the household sector. Now the household sector in the economy is largely the consumer sector of the economy. This is a sector where investments are going to be made, or where the entrepreneurship in this sector is going to be operated out of homes, and here less than 10 workers are going to be employed. So they are largely going to be in the informal aspect of the economy. Another thing which is vital to the household sector is that the household sector is largely a contributory in the savings of the economy, and they have savings greater than 70%. So here the editorial has made an analysis that it is the household sector which is the most impacted, and the investments in the household sector is the least, or the investment by the household sector are the least, and they have slowed down to 6.6%. So this is something that has been analyzed in this editorial. Another issue is with regards to the non-performing assets. Now here the analysis which has been drawn is that the rising non-performing assets have impacted the loans, and especially the loans to the household sector. So that is something that is a cause of slowdown in investments. Another analysis with regards to the GST and demonetization is something that has been made. Now here you need to understand that a number of times it is said that the GST as well as demonetization have both largely impacted the informal sector of the economy. However, the editorial has not made any such claim, because it is said that it is too soon to judge that, as there is a lag in the estimates and lag in the figures. So definitely some time is required to judge that, but definitely some impact could be attributed to GST as well as demonetization. So this is something that is vital. Another thing, as I had told you before, that the household sector is the largest contributor to the savings. Now if the household sector is not benefiting, then definitely savings in the economy have been impacted. Not only that, this is further impacting the credit to the informal sector. Now here what has been analyzed is that the largest borrower is the government, and after that even the corporates are able to get loans from loans or credit from the banks, but it is this informal sector which is not being able to get the credit from the bank, not only because of rising NPAs, but because of lower savings in the banking sector also. So all of that have had a vicious cycle, and they are impacting the household sector the most, or the informal sector the most. So it is in this reason also that there is a slowdown in investments in the informal sector. So that is something that has been analyzed. Another analysis is with regards to the fiscal deficit, because with the widening fiscal deficit, the borrowing of the government is going to increase, and if the government borrowing from the banks is going to increase, then what will happen is that the resource of the bank is something that is going to be stressed, and as a result of which the credit to the informal sector is going to be impacted. Now here you need to understand that the formal sector, or the corporates for that matter, can take loans even from foreign countries, but the informal sectors do not have so much of an access, so they are solely dependent on the domestic supply of credit. So if there is a fiscal deficit, or if there is a dearth in the credit by banks, then definitely the most impacted sector will be the informal sector, and it is this thing which the government needs to focus on, and it is this sector which the government needs to revive. So that is the entire gist of this editorial. Some suggestions in this regard have been given. The suggestions are that indeed the government should reduce its fiscal deficit. Also, the government should focus upon cleaning the bad loan mess and restoring bank health. So that is what has been analyzed here. So indeed the article is important. This issue of slowdown in investment is something that is pertinent, and so any analysis which helps in understanding that how this can be revived is something that will become vital for you for your GS paper 3 point of view. So that is the relevance of this article. Now, before we finish, some questions is what is we have suggested for today. So all these questions, please try and answer them in a word limit of 150 words all each, and I'm sure you can attempt these questions based on today's discussion. So with that, we finish today's discussion. I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow.